In the Russian media outlet Vesti, Alexander Mercuris introduced that a British analyst commented on a meeting between Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron in Paris. Under the headline Analyst Mercuris, Trump avenged Zelenskyy with indifference in Paris. The article claims,
British analyst Alexander Mercuris stated that Donald Trump's dismissive attitude at the meeting was a response to Volodymyr Zelensky's behavior during his U.S. visit. According to Mercuris, Trump's indifference was evident during a trilateral meeting in Paris with Macron. Mercury claimed that Trump was displeased with Zelensky's sharing of confidential NATO and nuclear weapons details. The insider publication citing Vesti propaganda broadcast.
However, the meeting in question was twice as long, not the 20 minutes cited by Vesti. Trump himself described the meeting positively, emphasizing Zelensky's desire for peace rather than displaying the alleged dismissive behavior. Mercuris, a discredited former British lawyer known for propagating Kremlin narratives, has a controversial past involving professional misconduct. His credibility is questionable, undermining the narrative pushed by Vesti. This and more in our today's episode of Truth Games. Stay tuned and subscribe to our channel. Another propagandist, Dmitry Kiselyov, in Vesti Недели, or the News of the Week, claimed that NATO is planning to divide Ukraine into occupation zones. They cited Spanish website Rebellion, which in turn printed an article from the Argentine outlet El Tábano Economista. The article's content aligns with a November 29 statement by Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service suggesting that Romania would control Ukraine's Black Sea coast, Poland would take western regions, Germany would oversee central and eastern areas. The UK would control northern regions including Kyiv. These narrative origins are firmly rooted in Russian disinformation campaigns by recycling and rebranding its own claims, though obscure foreign outlets. The Kremlin attempts to lend legitimacy to these bearless assertions. In this way, they try to revive the memories of the occupation zones of Germany and division of the country after World War II, at the same time calling Ukrainian Nazis and justifying the Russian occupation. And the fall of the Assad regime in Syria marked a significant loss for Iran and Russia. Israeli actions in Gaza and against Iranian proxies weakened Iran's influence, leaving Russia's reliance on tactical alliances exposed. Russia's strategic missteps in the region, including over-reliance on Iran, have led to diminishing influence and the collapse of its gains in Syria. This development undermines Russia's broader geopolitical ambitions in Africa and the Middle East. When Hamas launched its massive terrorist attack on Israel in 2023, few expected the war in Gaza to lead to the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. The Assad family, which had controlled the country for decades, almost 60 years, vanished almost overnight. A little over a year later, the sequence of events has become clear. In response to the attack, the Israeli army initiated a counter-terrorism operation, which escalated into a full-scale clearance of the Gaza Strip. On one side, thousands of Israeli casualties and hostages, on the other, thousands of Palestinian casualties and mounting international pressure on Israel. The region seemed trapped in a long-term and unsolvable conflict. But then other Iranian proxies in the region, Yemeni Houthis and Lebanon's Hezbollah, joined the war against Israel. Israeli counter-strikes decimated not only the upper but also the mid-level leadership of Hezbollah, significantly weakening the group. By the time a truce was declared, it was evident that Hezbollah had lost much of its former power. Without Iran's support through Syria, Hezbollah's survival now hangs by a thread. The intertwined conflicts between Israel and its adversaries, including missile exchanges with Iran, severely weakened Tehran's influence. Iranian bases in Syria were abandoned. Previously, Iran used a dual insurance strategy. When Hezbollah was busy with Israel, Iranian forces assisted Assad's regime. When Iran withdrew, Lebanese Shiite militants filled the void. Thanks to Israeli strikes, neither is now capable of saving Assad. And it's no secret that the Kremlin almost abandoned Assad at the onset of the Syrian civil war 13 years ago. Back then, Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, commander of the Quds Force, personally persuaded Vladimir Putin to intervene, promising it would be profitable. Russia intervened and indeed gained advantages. Hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees stormed the EU borders. Russia gained control over oil fields and established logistical hubs for its African operations. Moscow secured its naval base in Tartus, Syria, several air bases and a training ground for its military. This experience benefited Russia's military during the invasion of Ukraine, with Wagner PMC and experienced generals tested in Syria playing significant roles. However, Moscow overestimated the value of its alliance with Iran. While relying on Tehran for military aid in the war against Ukraine, the Kremlin failed to notice the growing resentment among other Middle Eastern and Gulf powers over its ties with Iran. Russia assumed it had struck a lucrative deal, but when Syria stabilized and Ukraine's conflict escalated, Moscow reduced its Syrian forces to a police presence and leaned entirely on Iran. That gamble backfired. Russia is now losing Syria and the revenues it generated, which supported not only Wagner Group, but likely many Russian generals. It's uncertain whether Russia can retain its bases, vital for its African influence network, including Libya's Haftar and pro-Russian regimes in the Sahel. On December 7th, during an unofficial summit in Paris, tied to the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral, Donald Trump met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Trump's comments on Syria and Ukraine were striking. He called on Putin to negotiate quickly and sarcastically mentioned Russia's retreat from Syria, perceived globally as a personal failure of the Russian dictator. The fall of Assad regime is seen as the collapse of Russia's gamble on Iran and the Assad regime itself, placing the Kremlin among the losers. Moscow's ties with Israel have deteriorated due to its arms supply to Hezbollah and support for Hamas, not to mention its alliance with Iran. Relations with Saudi Arabia have also cooled, and Turkey has not only expelled Russia from the South Caucasus and aided Azerbaijan in retaking Nagorno-Karabakh, but is now poised to crush any remaining pro-Russian forces in Syria through Turkish-backed rebels. By abandoning a policy of balancing competing interests and exploiting opportunities in chaotic environments, and by aligning itself with authoritarian regimes and becoming a military ally of Iran, Putin's Russia has suffered a significant strategic defeat. Over the past decades, Russian diplomacy has merely been an extension of its military and exploitative colonial policies in Africa and the Middle East. Moscow has prioritized tactical alliances over long-term interests and short-term profits over sustainable gains. This has led to the gradual collapse of many alliances and structures that the Kremlin had been building in the Middle East and Africa for at least the past 15 years and beyond. The most glaring example of this policy's failure, directly tied to Russian dictator, is Syria. He replaced strategic national interests with personal sympathies, such as his relationship with Erdogan or his disdain for Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. These failures are now inspiring those who wish to help Ukraine repel Russian aggression. While this reaction remains primarily emotional, sometimes all it takes to shift perceptions is for people, especially those who once saw no alternatives, to realize that the emperor has no clothes. So stay tuned and don't let propaganda win.
We in the game.